let's take it now then to some Cowboys rumors. First up, is Dak Prescott helping to fill the leadership void on the Cowboys right now? And, well, 4 stars on this one, and it's also kind of like, well, duh. He is the quarterback, and your biggest offensive leader, Jason Witten, has retired. Also gone is Captain Orlando Scandrick. So, yeah, Prescott is going to help replace Jason Witten as one of the key offensive leaders for the Cowboys. Prescott did serve as a captain last year, but it's different when your number 1 leader is gone. Prescott has to do more on that end. Of course, we'll see how that fares going forward for the Cowboys. Speaking of quarterbacks, is Cooper Rush ahead of Mike White at the quarterback spot? I'm going to give this one 3 stars because as of right now, yes, that is what the Cowboys have set up right now. Rush is the number 2. Mike White is the number 3. Now, of course, there are some buts on that one. The draft capital used does matter, and Cooper Rush was great in the preseason last year, earned the backup role for the Cowboys, but Dallas still spent a 5th-round pick on Mike White. And yes, while Rush is ahead of Mike White in OTAs right now, the Cowboys typically will keep the rookies lower on the depth chart to start the year. So that's why White is number 3. Now, he'll get a chance to work his way up, but as of right now, Mike White is the number 3 guy for the Cowboys, but that doesn't mean it's going to stay that way. So, folks, let me know. Give me a like if you think Mike White should be the backup quarterback, and a heart if you're a big fan of Cooper Rush. And no, neither of them is going to start over Dak Prescott. To number 3 now. Is Tavon Austin going to be the return man for the Cowboys? And again, 3 stars. It's not quite set in stone, but I would be really surprised if someone other than Austin, especially to start the year, was the Cowboys' punt and kick return specialist. Now, Austin has already said he wants to win the punt return job and help on kick returns as well. Last year it was Ryan Switzer. Of course, the Cowboys traded him away after they got Tavon Austin. He is the heavy favorite, and frankly, I don't even know who else you would want to put back there. Now, I think Jordan Lewis in particular could do a good job in that area, but the Cowboys, I think in reality, are kind of gifting that job to Tavon Austin. Not a lot of competition there, unless, of course, Austin has issues with returns or fumbling, which was a problem for him in previous stops with in a previous stop with the Rams. If it's your first time watching the show and you're wondering what these stars mean, well, here's the explanation. 0 stars, fake news. It's the number of fights Odell Beckham won against the net. 1 star is a small shred of truth. It could be possible, but don't bank on it. 2 stars is firmly in that rumor category. People are talking. 3 stars means it's pretty likely, not quite set in stone, but it should be the case. And 4 stars, Zeke Eaton, and it's a fact. Next up is Allen Hurns, the Cowboys' best wide receiver. Yeah, 4 stars on this one. Cowboys.com staff writers got together, ranked all the receivers, and no surprise, Allen Hurns was number 1. Now, look, guys, I like Michael Gallup. I like Cole Beasley. But Allen Hurns is the closest thing the team has to an actual number 1 wide receiver. He's actually really not a true number 1. But of the Cowboys guys at receiver, if I'm picking one guy to put up the best numbers this year, it's going to be Allen Hurns because he's not just a slot guy, even though he's played a lot of slot snaps with his last stop with the Jags. And it's going to be a wide receiver by committee approach. But Hurns is the Cowboys' best wide receiver, which is why I have some concerns about the unit overall. And that brings us to number 5. Is this a bottom 5 wide receiver and tight end core for the Dallas Cowboys? And I'm giving it 4 stars as well. Bleacher Report ranked all of them. They had the Cowboys at 30th. And frankly, I agree. Especially on paper, this is not a good wide receiver and tight end unit. They lost Dez Bryant. They lost Jason Witten. Now, I know that Dez and Jason were not the same players that they once were. But are you guys really going to tell me that Allen Hurns and Michael Gallup and Dalton Schultz are going to be better in year 1 than Jason Witten and Dez Bryant? No, and even throwing in Deontay Thompson, no, they're just not as good players, and maybe there's an argument to be made for addition by subtraction, which doesn't make sense, at least in my eyes, but this is not a great wide receiver and tight end core for the Dallas Cowboys. Now, it doesn't mean they'll finish as a bottom 5 unit, but what teams out there have a better group of, or a worse group of receivers and tight ends? I'll give you the Bills. I'll agree with that one. You'll throw out teams and be like the Jets, the Cardinals, the Dolphins, the Titans, who have Bleacher Report ranked behind. I'm taking the Titans group over the Cowboys group. I'm also going to go ahead and take the Cardinals group because it's got Fitz and Christian Kirk. So I have real concerns about the Cowboys, receivers, and tight ends. The good news is the Cowboys are going to run the ball so much they can get by with a lower-end receiving and tight end core But I do think right now, folks, it's one of the worst in the NFL. Doesn't mean they won't have success overall, but it's not a great unit on paper. Stick with the receiver themes here. Will Michael Gallup not top 450 receiving yards? I'll give this one 2 stars because people are talking about that. John Machada put the kind of the over-under his projection for Gallup at 450 yards and 4 TDs. Now, as of right now, Gallup kind of spending some time working with the number 3s and OTAs because the Cowboys are going to have those rookies start lower than most of the veterans, even guys like Lance Lenoir and T. Will, once he gets back, are going to work ahead of Gallup for now. But I don't think 450 is high enough for Michael Gallup. I think he has the upside to have a lot more yards, and I wouldn't be overly surprised if he actually led the Cowboys in receiving yards this year because there's such room for increased production from Gallup compared to what the Cowboys have right now because there's nothing at the wide receiver spot. So I'm going to go with the over here. I think it gets to at least 500. Maybe it's not that much more than 500, and I don't think he gets to 1,000 either. But I think Michael Gallup, because the Cowboys receiving room is just not that good right now, could be in for a big, big year. Now, here's a guy I know Cowboys fans like quite a bit, Darius Jackson. We'll break down if he's coming back, but first, we're from our sponsor, The Guild. We're going to give it just 2 stars for now, but those of you that were following the Cowboys closely in 2016, I know a lot of you guys liked Darius Jackson. He was one of Cowboys Nation's Twitter's guys early on. Then the Cowboys cut him. To make room for Darren McFadden, Jackson went to the Browns and then was cut earlier this year. Well, folks, the Cowboys did work him out today, and they cut Malik Earl, which opens up a roster spot. Could it be filled by Jackson? It's certainly a possibility. Of course, Jackson, as I mentioned earlier, was cut by the Cowboys, a 6th-round pick in 2016 out of Eastern Michigan. Since he left the Cowboys, he was claimed by Cleveland, was inactive for 3 games, and then missed all of this year with an injury, and then, of course, was cut by the Browns. I am okay with his return, but there's no guarantee he makes the roster. Of course, if he is signed, I do think it makes Bo Scarborough just a little bit less likely to make the roster, even though I think Scarborough will make it, and he'd make it over Jackson as well. But just keep an eye out for a potential return of halfback Darius Jackson. On to defense. Is Demarcus Lawrence not worried about his contract? I'll give this one 3 stars. Tank says he's not, and I do believe him for the most part. Now, Lawrence says he's not concerned. He's already signed his franchise tender. He's not going to hold out, and it's easier to not worry when you're locked in for $17 million this year. But at the same time, you know that Demarcus Lawrence is thinking about that next massive long-term deal that he wants to pay $17, $18 million plus per year. So I think on some level, it is in the back of his mind just a little bit. Maybe not fully worrying, but I do think he's thinking about it. And you know he wants to get paid in a big, big way, and I don't blame him for that one at all. We'll stay on the defensive lines, and is David Irving hurting his long-term deal changes? I'll give this one 2 stars. Look, there's a lot that's going on for David Irving this offseason, and I do feel bad for the guy because he arrived at OTAs out of shape and then was called out by Jason Garrett and Rod Marinelli. And this Fort Worth Star Telegram mentions, look, it's another potential red flag for David Irving long-term. Remember, the Cowboys only gave him a 2nd-round tender this year, not the 1st-round tender, which almost seemed like they were daring teams to make an offer and steal a 2nd-round pick or land a 2nd-round pick in exchange for David Irving. He dealt with the false domestic violence accusations, and I think, as pointed out by Mike Fisher, you're almost concerned more about just what Irving's focus is because that's a lot to deal with. And Irving is an immensely talented player. I absolutely want one on the Cowboys roster next year because when he's healthy, you typically don't find that type of interior defensive line production from a player of Irving's caliber or anyone's caliber. It's almost Aaron Donald or bust outside of Irving based on the sacks he put up in the limited number of snaps last year. So yes, I hope it's on the Cowboys roster, but I do have some nagging doubts that maybe the Cowboys are at least okay with moving on from Irving down the road.